Laurel looked out the window where the other children were playing and envied them. Hide and seek, Cossack bandits, soccer, and dozens of other fun activities were all near and far at the same time. She never got to meet anyone in the yard, but that wasn't the only thing stopping her. She just doesn't have time to play or even get to know anyone. The family could not do without her. First, my mom was in an accident, was in the hospital for a long time, with difficulty moved to the amphibian day stroller. And almost immediately, unable to bear the grief, Grandma Vivian fell ill. She, of course, moved around, but no farther than the apartment. And so, at the age of 11, Laurel became the legs and arms of the family. The girl hoped things would change soon. Daddy called her and promised he would come back and help her. Even if he took over some of Laurel's household chores, she would be able to go outside not only to school, the store, the post office. If only he would fulfill his promise. Laurel sighed and began to prepare the vegetables for the borscht, peeled potatoes, grate beets and carrots. Fry everything in a pan with tomatoes and onions. Then boil broth, but be sure to pour out the first broth. Carefully put the fried vegetables in the pot so that without splashing, otherwise the kitchen will have to clean. And then she added an author's touch to her grandmother's recipe. When the borscht was almost ready, she added mushrooms and sausages. And cover it with a lid to let it stand. Grandma Vivian told her, "You sprinkle vinegar on it. With borscht like this, any guy will marry you. You cook it today, and I'll show you how to make it tomorrow. I'll have a little rest, though." Tomorrow never came. Grandma had many recipes, but now they could only afford the most inexpensive products. Pasta, rice and beans, buckwheat with minced meat or hot sandwiches. And after all, both grandmother and mother need to eat well so as not to get sick. Laurel sighed again. She wanted a piece of real sausage or salted trout. A month ago, when the school had a party and the benefactors from the administration came, she couldn't keep her eyes off a tray of snacks. Some big guy in a jacket even reprimanded her. "Don't eat too many sandwiches," he said. "You'll get a tummy ache." Silly uncle. How can food give you a tummy ache? It's more likely that she'll get cramps from hunger again. From the big stage, the school children were told how much they care about orphans, homelessness, and other problems of people, and then gave her a ball and a stick. Laurel would gladly replace the equipment with a couple of bags of potatoes, rice, and buckwheat. Food supplies were running low. "Lunch is ready," said the girl cheerfully. There was a lot of meat left on the chicken bones, which the saleswoman proudly called a soup set. Laurel carefully cut it off to divide it equally. Mom could make it to the kitchen, though it cost her quite a bit of effort. Grandma, on the other hand, would have to be fed in the bedroom. She only got out of bed to get to the toilet or bathroom. "Oh, Laurel," Mom sighed, sitting in her wheelchair, "you should go outside, take a walk." "I can't," the girl answered. "I have to wash the floor, do the laundry, and now the dishes, to feed Grandma." Laurel never showed her mother that it was hard for her. The girl felt guilt early on. She was the reason her mom was in a wheelchair. If she had not distracted her that day, true, her mother convinced her otherwise, but still. Now Laurel tried to somehow make up for her guilt, and to do this it was necessary to become everything for her mother and grandmother. Cooking, cleaning, going to the store. How hard could it be? "For sour cream should go," said Mom. "We're out of sour cream." "Good," sighed Laurel. "I'll just feed my grandmother." "Do you have any money left?" Mom asked. "My allowance isn't due until tomorrow. Maybe I have some change." There was only one store left in their part of town, and they didn't want to go there. The girls still remembered how they used to live close to the center of the metropolis. In such a place, where on a tiny piece of land try to settle as many people as possible. They lived on the 25th floor, and it wasn't at the top. Laurel had been used to heights since childhood and had never imagined going down to the ground. But she had to. A long time ago, when nothing foreboded trouble, Laurel admired the views of the city from the window. And now they lived on the first. So there was at least a slim chance that her mother could go outside. In theory, it was easy. The first floor is optimal for a wheelchair user. It would seem, open the door, carefully lower the wheels, and enjoy the open space. What spoiled the picture was the staircase between the entrance and the landing. Only 7 steps, Laurel sometimes climbed them in a single leap. But for Mom, it was a real Everest. The administration promised to solve the issue, to put a ramp or an elevator someday. And then, where to go? In the center near the house, there was a subway and stores. But here, in the suburbs, even the curbs aren't low everywhere. A couple of times a month they did walk if someone helped. It's hard for Mom to move the wheels herself, but that wasn't all Laurel cared about. Looking at her mom, she realized that she was giving up. It was getting harder and harder for her to move forward, harder to heal and smile. She was getting desperate, which meant the headmaster's warnings might well become real. "Grandma, are you going to eat?" the girl asked. Feeding Grandma Vivian is a whole ritual. First you have to help her sit down, then you have to move the table to the bed. To listen from Baba Vivian, a whole treatise of words of advice, compliments, and stories from life. Then she would take a spoon or fork in her hand, peck at the dish her granddaughter had prepared, and plunge into reminiscence. "Peggy, when are you going to get married?" Grandma Vivian might ask in the middle of the meal. Laurel sighed. That her grandmother confused her with her mother was half the problem. Such questions were clearly connected to something more serious. Even with her childish mind, the girl realized that Vivian was going deeper and deeper into her own world. It was beginning to confuse not only people, but times as well. Her grandmother was pitiful. Laurel somehow could not remember her young. It felt like she had come into this world as an old woman. "Grandma Viviane, is the borscht tasty?" asked the girl to change the subject. "Yes," nodded the old woman. "Only you forgot the potatoes." "Hey, how?" Laurel was surprised. There it is, floating. "What kind of potatoes are potatoes?" Grandma Vivian lamented. Then came a monologue about how in her youth she had worked on the collective farm and spent time in the fields. Laurel had heard this story 100 times too, and from time to time the narrative grew with new details. Over the years, the heroism of rural laborers increased, and the potatoes in her grandmother's stories became the size of watermelons. Laurel took the dishes from her grandmother, carried them to the kitchen, and began to pack for the store. "Where is that package? It seems like it costs only a few rubles, but if you pay every time, over time 100 will accumulate." "Run to the store already." "I'll wash the dishes." "Don't worry," Mom said, but the girl shook her head. Mom kept trying to do some housework, but Laurel knew that every movement brings her pain, especially in the stroller. After the move, there was no money left for special furniture. The regular kitchen set didn't fit Mom. If she could reach the sink, it was with great difficulty. "May I save your strength, Mom?" Laurel said. I'll wash the dishes and go to the store." The girl delayed the grocery shopping as long as she could, and it was not just a lack of money. On her grandmother's pension and her mother's allowance, they could survive. The money was distributed by Mom, first of all, for the most necessary things. At least they weren't in danger of starvation. It was the saleswoman who seemed to have taken up residence in the pavilion. Her razor-sharp words really hurt. "We could have walked to the supermarket. But first of all, it's a half-hour's walk. Secondly, then I'd have to carry the heavy bags home. And thirdly, the prices are too high. They could afford a store with a sharp-tongued saleswoman, a supermarket. Do you want me to go to the store with you?" Mom suggested it. She knew very well what was embarrassing her daughter. "No, you what?" "You," replied the girl. "What a wind. You'll get cold feet again." "You just don't listen to her," said her mother. "Take the groceries, give her the money, and that's it." "Do you want me to file a complaint against her?" "There must be someone to take care of her." "Mom, relax." "It's okay." Laurel's cell phone screen lit up. She looked at it and hurried to turn it over. "You didn't notice?" Mom didn't seem to see anything suspicious in her sudden movement. That's good, otherwise she would be angry. The girl has her own secrets that she didn't want to tell her mom or grandmother about yet. Many years ago, talented managers derived a formula for success that allowed tiny stores to compete with huge supermarkets. To do this, there should have been no more than 2 people left there, and the working day to grow to obscene values. This, however, should not have any effect on the salaries of employees. Only the most desperate people could endure such conditions. One of them is firmly attached to the store with the poetic name Divni. "Look who's here," shouted the saleswoman. "Our heroine, a Spartan girl." "Well, do you want to choose the potatoes on offer?" There was nothing marvelous in the store. Laurel thought they should put another sign on the front, mean. It was the salesgirl who was constantly humiliating her. One day, the 2 of them came in here with her mom, and the wheelchair user's affliction became a source of inspiration for the mean woman. She didn't miss the slightest opportunity to say something mean. Thank God there was no one in the pavilion at that time. There was no escape from the sharp tongue of a woman of indeterminate age. She seemed to take pleasure in the fact that she could treat customers as she pleased. There was simply no second store in their neighborhood. A mystery. Laurel put sour cream, tasteless cookies, and bread in her basket. She thought, and added glazed cheese, the cheapest. "Oh, what's the holiday?" The saleswoman splashed her hands in a martial arts way. "Birthday. Are you going to spread cheese on cookies?" The girl was silent. Such jokes could still be tolerated, although she gave it with difficulty. But sometimes the saleswoman crossed the boundary of all decency and said really hurtful things, bringing Laurel to tears. Why she would do that is unclear. Couldn't Mom run away? The woman continued. Laurel's lack of response was getting on her nerves. The faker. "I've seen her move her leg. She's playing the part for the benefit, isn't she?" "No. How much do I owe you?" Laurel asked as she put her purchases on the counter. "I won't tell you," the saleswoman replied. "Not until you answer my questions." The door slammed and another customer entered the pavilion. And since he was unfamiliar to Easy, she preferred to keep silent. She practiced her barbs and witticisms only with regular customers. The newcomer seemed to have been here a couple of times, bought bread and cigarettes, but he didn't look familiar enough to be her victim. And he looked too serious for that. "All right," said the saleswoman. 290 rubles, and no change. But in Lydina's purse there was nothing but change anyway, so she easily counted out the necessary amount. Quickly putting the purchases in a bag, the girl hurried out the door. Ugh, that was the last time. She would never come here again, and now home. After all, in addition to her chores, she still has homework to do. And school was not going well.
The store is just outside the house, just a 5-minute walk. Just in time to call her daddy. He sent her a smiley face in Messenger to prevent her mother from finding out about their communication. She signed it as her classmate, Nadia Ivanova, and in the correspondence, only funny pictures and funny videos. It's like two girls exchanging humor. The precaution was unnecessary because her mom didn't touch her smartphone anyway and didn't control her in any way.
"No. Hi," Laurel said. "How are you?"
I'm fine," Dad replied. His voice was tired as always.
It's been a whole year since they started communicating. Now Dad is far away, somewhere in Africa, but he will surely come back. Laurel believed that for some reason. Every conversation ended with his promises that he was going to his homeland, but for some reason he never gave any exact dates. "No, I have good news," the Dad said. "I think 2 more weeks, and that's it." "No, to us." URL asked hopefully. Dad didn't say anything. Then he told her about his work. He described with enthusiasm how many different buildings they were building in a foreign, distant land. He told her how interesting his work was and how strange the rules were in the African country. Petri sends money, but his mother refuses to receive it, and she wouldn't answer her phone. Laurel believed it. What else could she do? "Don't tell your mom I called." Dad told her goodbye, or she'll get angry again. "Okay," Laura answered. "Oh, I'll come back, and then everything will be fine." "I will. Just hang in there." No one knew they were calling each other. Her mother had strictly forbidden her to talk to her father at an early age. Laurel cried at first, but then she got used to it. Both her grandmother and mother said only bad things about him. Up to a time, the girl believed it all. But the situation changed after that very accident, when her blossoming and successful mom was in a wheelchair. "Mom, I'm back," Laurel announced.
"Good for you. Are you okay, or is something wrong?"
Peggy always noticed her daughter's mood swings. Now she came in, not quite herself. She must have been listening to that sales girl again. Peggy wondered why a woman from a tiny store would talk to customers like that. But here, on the outskirts of the city, where they were forced to move from the center, their own rules make. "Well, Mom," Laurel replied. All in all, it's fine." "Let's talk about it," Peggy suggested. The hardest thing in the life of a disabled person is isolation. Not being able to go to work, not being able to pick out clothes at the store, not even being able to go to church. You can't mop the floor. You can't get something from the top shelf of the closet. You need a helper all the time. Your daughter, the youngest and only one, became your helper. And then Mom got sick, as if she didn't have enough to deal with. Peggy felt remorse all the time. She was ashamed of her own helplessness, of the pain that accompanied every movement. It had been 3 years since her accident, and there was little hope of recovery. "Yes, Mom," Laurel said. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know how you'll feel about it." Suddenly, they heard some noise from Grandmother's room. Vivian watched television almost all day long, but now was the rare moment when the box was silent. That's why the rumble seemed especially loud. Laurel froze in a daze. Clinging to the wall, Peggy moved slowly toward her mother's room. She crossed the hallway and pushed open the door. "Laurel." The woman shouted. "Hurry up and get in here. Grandma's not well." "Laurel, where's my phone?" Only the most pleasant memories remained in it, especially school. Over time, the remarks, the antics of classmates fade. Inedible dishes in the school cafeteria. And any warm moments, any celebrations become brighter. Gabriella was firmly stuck in this school, which she headed for a good 2 decades. And she still didn't want to retire. Me. "Hello." Once again, the principal was being nice. "Come in, have a seat." "We don't have time for that," replied the interlocutor gloomily. Strong coffee, but no sugar. The inspectors had been to her school countless times. Before Gabriella's eyes, approaches to education were changing, from the absolute freedom of the nufties to the total control of the 20s. She saw the epidemic of piercings, survived the invasion of rappers in oversized pants, witnessed the birth and untimely death of Imoe, and only one thing remained constant: the constant complaints of the administration. Gabriella was nervous. There were too many issues with this Lida and her family. In her quiet school, where only children of ordinary parents attended, hardship was neither liked nor approved of. The administration had sent down the 3rd letter demanding that they look into the situation and take action. Galena was hinted that her unwillingness to read between the lines could be regarded as incompetence. "The child is in a dangerous situation," argued McCullough, a department head in the administration. We could lose the girl at any moment." "Don't you agree with me?" The principal's intransigence forced the official to come to her school in person. Gabriella wistfully recalled the 2 blissful years of the coronavirus pandemic. Remote work, off days but paid, masks for visitors, and most importantly, no inspections. Alas, the sweet time is over. And now, if an official suddenly wants to visit her, he may not even warn. And I can't imagine how a teacher with such a solid experience and work experience doesn't see the problem. The official lamented. "It is obvious that the girl needs our help."
"We work with her every day," the principal assured him. "Here, take a look. Inspections, testing, preventive talks. All according to the manual. More coffee."
"This coffee only makes my heart ache," McCullough replied with an ostentatious sadness. "Do it again, with a little more sugar. And let's not change the subject, please." Gabriella took a deep breath. She looked at the official and tried to calculate his age. He'd graduated from Teachers University at 22, not before. 3 years, at least, he'd spent as a school teacher. Then he probably worked his way up to deputy. That's another 3 years. Then he spent a long time trying to get through the selection process for a higher position. Total. 33 years old, not younger. He's old enough to be her son, but he certainly looks older than his years. "Your information is out of date," the official said. "With all certainty, I declare that the grandmother is not able to look after the child." "Why?" The principal was surprised. "Age is not a judgment, young man. What's that got to do with it?" The official waved his hand resentfully. That's not the point. She went to the hospital yesterday, a fractured femoral neck. We have, the latest information." "What a nightmare," Gabriella whispered. "A fracture like that is every elderly person's worst dread." You see, McCullough nodded his head. "We have to take immediate action. You can't just write it off as some mythical grandmother's care. As you can see, I'm well informed." Gabriella sighed again. She would have to call a council, invite both the girl and her mother. She was notoriously difficult to get around, to bring the issue for discussion, to hear opinions. For some reason, Galena did not want to make a mess of it. People live their lives. Why touch them? As if there were no other problem families on her plot. "Well, one question," she said. "Why do you care so much about this family? Is she special? 2 months and the end of the year. Before you know it. And you have not removed a single child in a dangerous situation from the family." B answered the official from the administration. "0 bears 0 in the column. You short-sightedly fail to notice that it is the Petrovs who are fit to add a 1 to the report. Or how do we explain that gap at the end of the year?"
"Then we just don't have those kids," Gabriella replied calmly. "Old neighborhood, not many families. We've never suffered from an overpopulation of dysfunctional ones."
"I don't want to hear excuses," shouted the man. All neighborhoods are the same, and you're the only one with a 0. That's enough. We've got to do something. McCullough said about 1,000 words and drank 4 cups of coffee. Gabriella started out as a math teacher and automatically counted everything that happened around her. That made her feel better. Laurel she felt sorry for, both maternally and humanly. The entire faculty was aware of her troubled history. Now the absence of her grandmother added to the ordeal. The principal sighed and pressed the selector button. Now then, she said, prepare the orders. We'll be holding an extended council on the Pattinsons. What is today, Tuesday? Let's make it Friday, 6 o'clock at night. Hospitals always scared her. It was like a whole town with a gated community. While you could figure out where to go while you looked at the map, it was scary, but there was nowhere to go. Her grandmother was waiting. Laurel had a hard time finding the right building. It was the biggest and tallest. Not a hospital, but a whole metropolis. Now there was one last obstacle in the way, a nurse who had to follow instructions. No, children are not allowed either, said the woman in the white coat. I understand that you want to see your grandmother. I can give you the phone and you can make a video call with me, but she doesn't know how to use it. Ewell almost screamed. From resentment and helplessness, she wanted to weep. The girl had traveled a long way, all alone, to hear such a thing. Laurel could not understand why she, her own granddaughter, was not allowed to visit her grandmother. When her mother was in the hospital, the doctors even insisted that she come more often. But now? All right, the nurse gave up. I'll show you in, but just for a minute. Put on shoe covers and a mask, too. You have your own, don't you?
Laurel started to cry with resentment. How did she know she had to bring a mask and shoe covers to the hospital? All she had brought was lard sandwiches, just the way her grandmother liked them, and also a bag carefully folded by her mother. Slippers, a mug, a towel, and other small things. There were too many conventions in the world of adults. The girl could not get used to them.
Okay, eyed the nurse. Here, put it on, but do not cry. Let's go. I hope no one will see us, and I won't get hurt for this one. The woman led Laurel through the long corridors of the first floor. It was the second time the girl had been in such a large hospital, but she was still amazed at the scale. 3 years ago, when the accident happened to her mom, Laurel was taken to the ward by her grandmother, and now the girl has to wander the corridors on her own without an adult.
You understand. It's not my whim. Justified the nurse. It's the pandemic, the coronavirus. Do you know what it is?
No. Yes, Laurel answered. Of course you do. The girl loved learning through Zoom. She could devote many times more time to her mother and grandmother. And then when studying went back to the usual format, the opportunities faded. Now she had to get up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast, take out the trash, and help her mom get dressed. Here we go, the nurse said as she led her to the service elevator. Come on in, baby. They're charging us 3 hides for this coronavirus. You're lucky you're right next to the elevators. The rounds are over, no one will see us. Just make it quick, okay? Grandma was lying on the bed with her leg hanging from the ceiling. It was weird, but the room was warm and there were only 3 people in it. Grandma Vivian turned to her granddaughter as if she sensed her, and the smile immediately appeared on the old woman's gray face. What she had been through. Oh, Peggy, she said. Can you imagine? I twisted my ankle. Grandma, it's me, Laurel, the girl said. I brought sandwiches.
The nurse let them talk for a few minutes and went to check on the other patients. She would adjust someone's pillow, give someone a bottle of water. Laurel thought what a hard job it was. She didn't want to work in a hospital. She had a dream, a completely different dream.
Grandma, does it hurt a lot? The girl asked. Well, the old woman waved her hand. It will heal. And when I saw you, I thought of Peggy again. How is she? As Laurel walked toward the subway, she felt very tired. She had homework to do, and then she had to give her mom a massage. If she didn't exercise her legs, they wouldn't work. Suddenly her cell phone rang, and a familiar number popped up. Laurel, don't worry, the teacher said. Gabrielle's having a big council meeting Friday night. You should come with your mom. But you know that, the girl sighed. She was tired of telling everyone that a wheelchair was not an all-terrain vehicle, and therefore her mother would not be able to climb up to the 2nd floor. L'Oreal, don't worry, the teacher continued. Gabriella knows. We'll be meeting on the 1st floor. She told our men to help. Mom's going to be there for sure. I'll call her too, okay? It's hard to live without a dream, and Laurel had one. When the girl got off the subway, she suddenly froze in front of a billboard. On it were 3 ballerinas, frozen in the most graceful movement imaginable. For a few minutes, Laurel stood admiring them, unable to move. She wanted to be a ballerina too. She had everything she needed for that. Long legs, a slender body, excellent stretching. But when would she go to class? The school advertised various clubs and sections, and ballet also called, but warned that the selection, very strict. Of course, Laurel would have passed, but where would her family find the money to buy her special shoes and skirt? Who would drive her to the other side of town? Apparently, the dream would remain a dream. Laurel could only put her feet up and stretch in her room, imagining she was studying ballet and admiring ballerinas on her phone. The drive to and from the hospital took over 3 hours. It was already 9 o'clock at night, and there was still so much to do.
Peggy tried not to show her despair to anyone. At some point, she'd pulled the black card, and her life had been a mess ever since. Trouble started with Vincent, swearing his love for so many years and then running away. Then the accident. She still couldn't believe that such a ridiculous accident could wipe out all her plans and hopes for the future. Now her mother was in trouble, and there was nothing she could do to help.
Peggy felt like a doll with something broken. She couldn't feel her legs at all, despite such prolonged treatment. But problems, as it turns out, were enough. So it was today, a call from school. Instead of helping her, instead of caring for her, they want to take her child away from her. You could hear it on the first floor. The key turns in the lock. Her daughter is back. Finally, how is she? Peggy asked when Laurel appeared in the doorway.
She's lying down. The girl shrugged.
Did you talk to her? Did they let you in? Yes, Laurel said. But it's a secret, don't tell anyone, since the woman laughed. Laurel was the only joy in Peggy's life. Looking at her, she knew that everything was worthwhile. But now she was her only support, too. Who would try to keep them apart is beyond me. I got a call from the school, Peggy said. They say they can't live without me. They're expecting me to come over Friday night. You think about it. It's like the weekend is starting, and I have to go home. And they decided to take me out. I know, Laurel replied. Are you going to eat pancakes? I'll make them real quick. Peggy watched her daughter kneading the batter and couldn't get enough of it. Yeah, the kid had to grow up fast. On the other hand, she's so independent. She can cook, clean, do her own laundry. If they had a little more money, it would be possible to order ready-made food right at home. At least the girl was understanding of all of the trials that fell to her lot.
Did you do your homework? Peggy asked. Do you want me to help you? No, Mommy, don't, Laurel answered. I can do it all by myself.
This independence, on the one hand, pleased, but on the other, be frightened. It wouldn't be long before she'd be out of the house. And she has to think about how to prepare for this time. Just recently, she was a strong and independent woman. She worked as a deputy director of construction, personally traveled to the sites and controlled everyone and everything. And now she can't even control her own limbs.
Oh, Mom, they won't take me away, will they? Laurel suddenly asked.
What do you mean? Peggy was surprised. Who will? Those people at school. The class teacher told me you can't do parenting. Don't worry, sweetie, Peggy replied. You gotta fight till the end. You can't give up. Put the pancakes over here and I'll wrap carrots in them. The tricky thing about her injury was that any careless movement could cause unbearable pain. Now she had raised her arms too high and a pulse pierced her entire body. Even her legs hurt, though she couldn't feel them at all. Peggy was instantly pale and sweat appeared on her forehead. Reese. Mommy, come on, Laurel said. I'll wrap it myself. Okay, Peggy agreed. Hand me my pills. If it weren't for the painkillers, she'd have gone crazy a long time ago. Peggy swallowed one pancake with difficulty and then turned around and went to her room. When she bought this apartment, it seemed to her luck. 3 rooms, first floor, not the worst neighborhood. But now, after a year of living in the suburbs, the dead end was more and more clearly visible. The money was spent on medical treatment, not even enough for a normal stroller.
Oh, Mommy, I need to massage my legs, Laurel said.
Nah, don't, Peggy sighed. Why don't you get some rest?
Mom, you're not giving up, are you? Seriously asked her daughter.
Of course not. Okay, come on. She had never asked Laurel to help. But the clever girl had watched carefully the expensive resuscitator who had come a few times a year ago and had memorized his movements. He kneaded her legs as she lay on the bed, rubbing her muscles. It wasn't easy for the girl, of course, but Laurel tried. Now she was visited only by a free doctor, and from him she heard only regrets. But she was grateful for that. It was 11 p.m. was another shift coming to an end. Easy walked to the entrance to flip the sign to closed and lock the lock. Suddenly, someone yanked the door open sharply, so sharply that she couldn't hold it. Night visitors, come to think of it. No, darling, you'll have to find somewhere else to have fun. It's closed. You, she said in the nastiest voice she could muster. No, my princess, the tipsy man replied snidely. One more minute. We have to work until the last customer. Get out, the princess is not in the mood today. Replied Easy, pushed the uninvited guest and quickly closed the door. She felt better immediately. Doing bad things to people was a wonderful thing. It was only at times like this that she forgot for a second how worthless and miserable her life was. But there was no one to blame for that. She had backed herself into a corner. Easy loved trading, but there was nothing else she could do. Since she was 16, she'd been behind various counters selling beer and clothes, gloves, and eyeglasses, moving further and further up the sales career ladder. But in this stall, proudly called a pavilion, she was stuck. Why didn't you serve me? I asked a fat man standing behind her counter reproachfully. She hadn't even noticed he'd come in. Quiet as always, just before closing time. How does he manage to do this every time? I'm closed, Easy answered, but in a less confident tone. 11 o'clock at night is closed. I'll give you that, closed. Go get him. Come on, Adrian demanded. The shop girl had no choice but to rush to the entrance, open it, and go out into the street. In the street, illuminated by lanterns, Easy easily recognized the wobbling figure of the guest. He had not gone very far. Come back, she shouted. The princess changed her mind. He moved slowly, wobbling, but did not even turn around. He only waved his hand, saying, "Leave me alone." Maybe he was afraid she'd beckon him to close the door. Yeah, she's in for a world of hurt. So this is how we pay our debts. Adrian yelled at her when she came back alone. I forgive you for everything, by the way. And you, well, I'm sorry, Adrian. I'm sorry. Izzy answered him and even smiled. At least he didn't hit her this time. The old bruises on her face had just healed, and she didn't want to get new ones in their place. Look at me, said the owner and delved into the receipts. He came every 3 days for the proceeds, trusting no one else to handle the money. I'll forgive you this time, all right? Easy tried to remember where this life had started. Austin, as they say, her common-law husband, had gotten her a job in this pavilion. He himself worked as a loader, and she got a place behind the counter. Ira was then stupid, naive, did not do accounting at all. And Adrian was different, liked everything. The 2x2 schedule, the salary, and the atmosphere. But Austin disappeared one day after a year of working together, and then she learned a terrible word: inventory. Adrian found a huge shortage, $500,000. Izzy could not even believe that such a large sum could be stolen in such a store. But the owner was not to change his mind. He was somehow sure that it was Izzy and her boyfriend who had stolen his money. The shortfall had been pinned on her. Adrian said, haughtily, "Thank Austin. Thank your failed husband." The owner fired the second shift, leaving Izzy alone in the company of a disenfranchised loader. They didn't stay long and changed almost every month. The saleswoman now kept a close eye on the money from the cash register. She wrote everything down and checked the receipts, but her debt was melting too slowly. In 2 years, Adrian had only written off half the money. She had to work 12 hours at the counter to pay off her debts. Only one day off, Sunday, kept her warm. Then she could come to work not at 9 in the morning, but at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Kind of like a day off. Have you forgotten where I got you? Adrian asked. Have you forgotten my kindness? I could have turned you in to the police, you and Austin. Adrian, come on, Izzy said. It's been so long. You're going to be working me hard and hard. Did you see Austin sneaking money out of the cash register? I did, and I didn't say a word. So you were in on it with him. I haven't forgotten anything. Izzy sighed. It was a shame not only to get such a large debt, but also to lose her admirer overnight. He quietly packed up their room and left. At least he called her. She's changed since then, too. All I had to do was piss off the customers. The only people who come here are those who have nowhere else to go. Once I yelled at an old lady who couldn't find a penny, and it was over. It made my heart feel good. So that Peggy could attend the meeting, the principal decided to hold it in the auditorium. It was the only place where a person in a wheelchair could get in without any problems. Looking at the girl's mother, Gabriella felt both pity and fear. If it were up to her, she wouldn't have looked at the half-paralyzed woman at all. She had to get this done quickly and move on. "But dear colleagues," Gabriella said, "let's not waste any time. Let's deal with the Petrov situation. This is the third time we have been instructed to check the family's condition and make a conclusion as to whether Peggy Petrova is capable of fulfilling the duties of a parent." For the third time, Peggy felt disgusted. School is only a 5-minute walk from home, but they seemed to her like a march to Calvary. First, 2 locals carried her down the stairs in a wheelchair for 50 rubles and almost dropped her. Then she forced up hills and slowed down on descents to get to school. Laurel kept trying to help, but where can she go? A little girl cannot cope with a big stroller. "We're getting alarming signals," the principal continued. "In fact, Laurel has been left to her own devices. She not only has to support herself, but also, pardon me for being blunt, her infirm mother. While we all deplore Peggy's situation, we need to. Let's not be rude. Put the children first." Is the psychologist here? When they were invited to with their daughter was indeed crowded. Some pedagogue could well cope behind the rows of soft seats. Laurel, tired after the school day and the transitions with her mother, almost dozed off in her seat. At first, Peggy wanted to get up and resent her. Then she remembered that she was confined to a wheelchair and decided to keep quiet. "The child's emotional state is alarming," said the girl, obviously a psychologist. "I conducted a series of tests for anxiety, depression, goal setting." "No, what conclusions?" Suddenly asked a full man in a jacket who was sitting on one of the chairs. "The psychological state is extremely unstable," answered the psychologist. "The child is obviously under great stress, which can be explained by the situation in the family. There is a complete mismatch between age and behavioral roles." The psychologist said a lot of other clever things, the general sense of which was that Peggy had put too much responsibility on her only daughter, and that she herself, therefore, was enjoying the situation. It was outrageous, but Peggy knew how to keep her emotions in check, especially in a situation like this, where she had to be patient. Then the class teacher, who had not been particularly fond of Laurel from the beginning, spoke. Then the representative of the PA made a denunciatory speech which surprised Peggy. She continued to keep silent, though it was getting harder and harder to hold back. Finally, Laurel got a word in edgewise. "What's going on?" the girl asked. "Why are you guys talking about us like this? My mother and grandmother and I are doing just fine. It would be better if you helped." "Laurel," interrupted the principal. "We don't think your mom is capable of parenting." "But Gabriella," objected the girl. "She's getting better. She's doing much better. Mommy's been practicing every day. Yes, it's hard without Grandma, but we're not going to give up. Why are we listening to her?" Slammed his fist on the table with a full man who had been silent until now. "As we decide, so it will be." There was a murmur in the hall. The teachers were arguing. Obviously, they had to solve such cases not often. It's one thing when parents abuse alcohol and don't take care of their children. It's quite another if the mother is just in trouble, and she's reacting so calmly. "Nay, can I say something?" Peggy finally asked. "Do I get a defense or not?" "Yes, please," Gabriella nodded. "We are listening attentively." "I'm going through a difficult time right now," Peggy said. "You can't prepare for something like this. There are so many problems. But I can tell you one thing. I'm not giving up hope. I'm not giving up. I have a plan to make things right." Petrova, the man in the jacket, interrupted her. "You tell us one thing. Are you taking those drugs now? Don't make me say that word out loud in front of the children." "No," Peggy replied. It was getting harder and harder to stay calm. "The very drug you don't want to say has been out of stock for 6 months, and I've decided to give it up myself." The man was embarrassed. He was quickly going through the papers on the table in front of him. He rubbed his head with both hands and looked from Gabriella to Peggy. He opened his mouth to say something, but then he was embarrassed. "I'm asking one thing," Peggy said, to build on the success. "Give us some time. I'll get a nurse. And Laurel will get an assistant. I'll knock on every door to get us help." "It's just," the man in the jacket started to say, but the principal interrupted him. 2 weeks, Gabriella said. 2 weeks to correct the deficiencies. Otherwise, the removal of the child is inevitable." All the teachers raised their hands, almost unanimously. "Unanimously," the principal said in a satisfied voice. The board decided to recognize the family as a dangerous situation, to give a period of 2 weeks to eliminate the shortcomings that have been pointed out. So the Petrovs are no longer detained. Help Peggy up or get out in the hall. On to other matters, colleagues. "Mommy, don't cry," Laurel pleaded as they stood in the hallway. Don't cry. Let's go. You and I have a lot to do. We need to stretch your legs." "Wait," Peggy said, wiping away her tears. "Wait a couple more minutes. I haven't said everything I need to say yet." Just then the door to the schoolroom opened and the principal came out. She walked briskly, not looking back, but it was impossible to keep up with a wheelchair in the narrow hallway. Peggy moved nimbly toward her, working her arms vigorously. She must have never moved so fast in a wheelchair before. Gabriella saw her and tried to change her trajectory, but it was too late. "A word, ma'am?" Peggy asked. The principal tried to go, but the woman nimbly grabbed her arm. "How can you say no to a wheelchair user? Just a few words." "No, okay," Gabriella gave in after a brief maneuvering. "I'm listening. What kind of show is this?" The woman was outraged. "I will complain. I'll go all the way to the top. You'll all be fired, do you hear me?" Surprisingly, the director reacted calmly to the threat. She adjusted her jacket, looked at Peggy expressively. "Listen to me, please," Gabriella said. "A child should have a childhood. It's not just about her becoming your nurse. It's about you two. You know what we're talking about, don't you?" Her hands were tired, and her palms were blistered. She'd noticed that experienced strollers wore gloves, but for some reason she didn't. She just hadn't quite gotten used to the idea that infirmity was permanent, and you have to live with it. The girl just felt devastated. Teachers so mundanely decided her fate, as if it was a car or another inanimate object. "Look, we're out of oil," Peggy said. "It might be a good idea to go to the store. It's on the No need, Mom," Laurel said. There's that evil woman. She'll make fun of you again." "No, let's go," Mom demanded. "Let her say all the nasty things to my face. If she has the gut to get to the store, you had to cross the road and the curb." In front of the pavilion was a special lowering of the sidewalk, but exactly in this place someone put a huge car. Not to go around and not to go around. Laurel came closer and looked for a plate with a phone number. Under the windshield was an ironic inscription. "Is my car in the way?" "Sorry, Mom. Let's go around," Laurel said. "No," said Peggy. "We could turn around and get in. Let's try it." Legacy commenced. The woman must have lacked experience as a wheelchair user. For several minutes she tried to climb the curb, but to no avail. Eventually, she moved further down the path and found an undercut of the curb that wasn't blocked by a car. These movements had completely exhausted her. She literally couldn't feel her arms. She needed a break. There was a convenient ramp to the store, which Peggy negotiated with the help of her daughter. Together, they were able to make their way through the transparent door. Old man inside, there were a few customers. Old men and old women, leisurely comparing prices and looking for something cheaper. No way. ESI picturesquely splashed her hands when she saw Laurel and her mom on the stroller. "They're my regulars. It's been a long time since your feet have been here, Queen Mother." Peggy thought her daughter's stories about this woman were exaggerations. Now she could see for herself that they were real. The saleswoman kept going, as if in a hurry to tell all the crude jokes she'd made about wheelchair users. Peggy was literally dumbfounded by this torrent of barbs. "I thought that after our first meeting you would never set foot here again," she continued, smiling wryly. Oh, I'm sorry. There are legs, but they're kind of gone." Crude jokes, which she could have just ignored, were suddenly painful to Peggy. She felt a terrible urge to respond in such a way as to silence the saleswoman, to say what she thought about the insolent brat who had no one else to take it out on. But I didn't have the strength. Even a small line of customers could not stop the flow of snide remarks. She was both punching out the goods and humiliating her customer at the same time. "Now," dear Peggy said instead in the calmest voice she could muster, "you can see that this is a person with a disability. I need a packet of butter. Show a little respect." "Who's going to respect me?" Azee replied sharply. She wants the butter. I've been standing here for 12 hours a day. I don't even have time to go to the bathroom." Because of the saleswoman's behavior, the line in front of the counter began to accumulate. The small pavilion could hardly fit 10 people. In the evening, there were many visitors, and there might even be a queue. For some reason, Peggy wanted to demonstrate her legal awareness. After all, people with disabilities should be served without waiting in line. Why not demand that the slut obey the law? No, dear, she said. I have the right not to stand in line. You must serve me on a priority basis. Come over here and sell me butter, only not to stand in line. Eaz acted surprised. I wondered why you were always sitting. If you don't want to stand in line, don't. It seems to me that if you wanted to, you couldn't. The few customers looked at Peggy. She couldn't take it anymore and cried. The saleswoman had hit a sore spot. The woman would never really be able to get out of her chair, no matter how much she wanted to convince herself otherwise. She could hire the best doctors, buy the most expensive medications. It wouldn't help. Her daughter approached the counter and looked at the saleswoman defiantly. You know what? You're actually the one who's never going to be able to get up. Me, ESC marveled. Look, I'm standing. And she took a few steps forward and backward to dispel any doubts. You think you're standing. You're not really standing, you're lying down. At the bottom. At the bottom? Easy asked. The girl who never responded to her barbs, as if she were cutting her without a knife. You've given up, Laurel said. That's why you're acting like this. And you can't give up. Never. Me. Easy snapped. Surrendered. What do you know about it, you little thing? Yes, the girl nodded. I can see you don't like working here. I can see you're like a fly behind a glass, fighting and fighting. My mom's strong. You're not even close. Choke on your butter, we're leaving. The girl turned around, grabbed Peggy's stroller by the handles and started pushing it toward the exit. There were claps at her back as the few customers applauded. They must not have liked Easy and her jokes either. The saleswoman herself stood frozen with her hand outstretched toward the refrigerator. The girl's words, harmless at first glance, hurt her deeply and deeply. Why are we clapping? Well, she said after a pause. I have no flies here, not a single one. Only bees fly to honey, you know. The 7 steps leading to the first floor were her Everest. How do you climb them if your legs won't obey you? Because they were late for a meeting in the store, there were no one willing to help her climb them for a reasonable fee. After the humiliation of the last hour, Peggy wanted to show her strength of character. May, can you lift the chair? She asked her daughter. Bring it into the apartment. Yes, but... Peggy didn't listen to the girl, grabbed the handrail against the wall and began to climb up. It was clumsy, but what can you do? You had to get used to it sometime. There was a flaw in her plan. Once on the platform, she was completely exhausted, and now she had to get back into the chair. Laurel couldn't lift her crippled body. She had already struggled to get the stroller in. We're out of oil, said Peggy, lying on the platform with her head up. She smiled. Mommy, why did we move here? The girl asked. It's not a good place for a handicapped person. That's true, agreed Peggy. We moved here because Mommy ran out of money. Give me a hand. I'm gonna storm my wheelchair. With great difficulty and with her daughter's help, she managed to climb back into the wheelchair. She was sweating from the exertion. Peggy expected her body to respond with pain to such an ordeal, but today her body was responding calmly to all the challenges and hardships. When she sold her previous apartment and paid off her debts with the bank, there wasn't much money left, and the first floor seemed like a great option to her. Mom, what did you say about a nurse? Suddenly asked the girl, opening the door. Where are we going to get the money for her? That was just a figure of speech, Peggy said. I've bargained for 2 weeks. I'll think of something. Your mom used to be good with people, you know. The girl sighed. She seemed to take the situation more seriously than her mother. It was only now starting to dawn on Laurel that they might be separated. Who would take care of her mother? Who will stretch her legs, cook breakfast and dinner? The girl became very sorry for herself and her mother. But you cannot give up. You need to think. She just taught the sales clerk, who was 3 times her age, not to despair. Let's ask Daddy for help, Laurel suggested. I wish he was with us, or get a room somewhere nearby. You don't have a father. Peggy was angry and her cheerful mood faded. He left you. Don't you dare say his name in my house. But Mom, they won't give up, the girl continued. They won't give up. Peggy thought her daughter needed some kind word of encouragement, to encourage, to help, to participate. But the words just wouldn't make sense in her head. How could she explain that her worthless father wouldn't help her, not even by crawling to him on her knees? That was exactly what Peggy could theoretically do for her daughter. Tomorrow's the weekend, Mom said. We'll sit down together and figure out how to get out of this. And we have to go to Grandma's house too. Can you do that? No, of course, said the girl. But go on, take a break. I'll make sandwiches. I have some inspiration. Of course, the woman was lying. Her arms were very tired after the physical exertion, but she wanted to show herself that she could still do something, that she was a mother, not a burden. With the board on her lap, Peggy could cook something, like slicing bread and buttering it. It took effort to stretch it over 4 slices of bread. There was no meat either, so Peggy finally chopped 2 sausages she could reach in the refrigerator. At times, the pain receded, and Peggy could even hope for the best. And on this night, when her maimed body wasn't giving her any trouble, it was her soul that decided to suffer. Who was she kidding? She can't hire a nurse for herself or a babysitter for her daughter. It's not even that Laurel was brilliant at all the housework. The problem is something else. Poverty is her biggest ailment. As soon as you fall out of the world of successful people, poverty is, if you're young and healthy, it can be cured. But for the infirm and the elderly, Peggy thought about the fact that winter would soon come, and she didn't have the money to buy her daughter a new jacket and boots. Maybe she really should give up. They say that everyone should help the infirm. On paper, maybe that's true. But in life, it's the other way around. Agree with that soulless principle and ask her for help. Maybe there's a boarding school where children can stay with infirm parents. Laurel. Peggy called out, chasing away her bleak thoughts. Come and have some tea. Whale hated the subway. Every time she went down to the subway, the girl felt an incomprehensible fear. Before the accident, her mother used to take her by car. She is an excellent driver, and together they would go to the swimming pool or to the supermarket, where you don't have to talk to the salespeople at all. Sometimes their grandmother joined them. The 3 of them had a lot of fun. Once again, the girl remembered that fateful day. How her mom sat her on the booster, buckled her in, pressed the gas. According to the rules, children are forbidden to travel on the front seat. But she and Mom were so inseparable, they ignored that requirement. My mom had a big French car which she affectionately called Ducia. Laurel's fondest memories were associated with this car. How they went to St. Petersburg for a weekend and wandered along the beautiful streets, admired the embankment. How they went to the ice arena and watched hockey, and then a long wander around the floors of the parking lot because they forgot where they left their car. How we went to the water park together, where we rode down the high slides together on a cotton candy. Now it's all in the past. To Laurel's daily worries was added a trip to the hospital. But simply put, a trip. First, to boil Grandma's favorite borscht and pour it into a jar. Then to ride the 3rd trolleybus to the subway. Then another 20 minutes of shaking deep above the ground. And then, finally, the hospital. But no one is allowed inside. Quarantine. In the car, Laurel dozed off and saw the day again. The crossroads that took Ducia and her mother's health. The girl knew that the car was an automatic box. It means that you only need to press the pedal, and you don't have to pull the lever. Why did she then tell her mom that it was okay to drive? When the girl got out of the subway and walked towards the hospital, she remembered well where the building she needed was. She tried to give herself a cheerful and carefree look. Downstairs, Laurel met the same kind-hearted nurse who had taken her to her grandmother's room, despite her inhibitions. "Hello," she smiled. "I'm here to see Vivian. Remember me? I wish I could go up and talk to her. My mom and I miss her terribly." "You can't," said the nurse, checking the list and sighing. "No way." "Nay, should I pass the soup?" Laurel asked and picked up her bag. She was ready to say no, but she was still upset. "No, honey, it won't work," said the woman in the white coat. Here, there's a thing, What's wrong?" "Your grandmother's gotten worse," the woman said. "Tonight she was transferred to the intensive care unit. But don't worry, and don't worry. It has nothing to do with the trauma." "Bish, what does it have to do with?" Laurel asked. She felt the floor go out from under her feet, and then the nurse took her by the shoulder. "Coronavirus be damned," she sighed. She tested positive. Her SATs are low. "You know what it does to old people?" "And you're not mistaken." Laurel asked, hopefully, "Maybe you're confusing my grandmother with someone else?" "If only," replied the nurse. "Do you know how good my memory is? And her name is so rare, Vivian. That was my grandmother's name too. But you hang in there. God willing, she'll pull through. Me. What am I gonna do?" "I'll write your phone number right now." The woman in the white coat took a piece of paper and scribbled a few numbers on it. "Here. This is the duty post in the red zone. You can call periodically, inquire. If they don't answer the first time, call again. There's a lot of patients, You can't keep track of them all. Low and dejected, Laurel walked back to the subway. In her bag dangled a useless can of borscht, which she had so lovingly prepared. She understood about the intensive care unit. It was a place where people were put when they got sick. But what is saturation? And why was Grandma's saturation low? She should have asked the nurse all these questions instead of leaving. And most importantly, would her ordeal ever end? Ever? Daddy, only Daddy could help her. She pulled out her phone and hit the call button on Messenger. Silence. He hadn't answered her yesterday either, but she had called him late at night. The girl still couldn't remember the difference between her city and Africa. Papa never told her what time it was in the city where he was. Laurel pressed the call button again and again. Silence. Not one funny picture, not one smiley face. Daddy was gone. That hurt worse than a knife. After all these years, he'd appeared in her life and then disappeared again. But her heart refused to believe her father was devious. No, something had happened to him. Just like Mom, just like Grandma. It's just a pity that no one will help him there in the faraway land of Africa. He's all alone there. Their usual conversation always took the same turn. She would ask Daddy to come back to her, and he would explain at length why it was impossible. He had a very beautiful voice, like a newscaster or a politician. The girl tried to change her father's mind, refusing to believe that adults could be so stupid and vindictive. It's hard for me to come back, Laurel. Now, sighed the father in such cases. I hurt your mother terribly. I hurt her to death. She'll forgive me. Laurel repeated to herself over and over again. After all, her mother, so strong and successful, so lively and purposeful, always forgave her. Her daughter. Was her daddy so very different? If he had returned a little sooner, nothing would have happened to him there, in the faraway land of Africa. Listener immersed in gloomy thoughts, Laurel went down to the subway. It was indeed a mechanism that always worked. The trains underground, like giant toys, kept moving forward, and it seemed to her that these huge, soulless machines didn't care what happened to the occupants. Like escalators, they would keep moving, no matter what happened outside. Gabriella rewrote her own letter of resignation for the third time. The calculation did not allow her to resign just like that. Otherwise, she would be given a regular pension, not a civil servant's. And the difference was enormous. The principal did not want to participate in this play, which was played by McCullough. Removing a child from a family is always stressful, but the Petrovs case was special. In her long career as a teacher, she had seen many families that were troubling. She was impressed by the mother who left her young schoolchildren at home alone, while she herself organized multi-day trips to guests, or a father who, for some reason, decided that his son should eat sunshine and vegetable broth. But these were all extremes, inevitable in huge cities. The Petrov situation seemed to demand a very different approach. Not the kind of formal approach that the administration suggested, but a creative one, raised on the ideals of the Soviet Union. The principal struggled to remember what could have been offered at that time. Perhaps an apartment would have been found for them, and they would have found the crippled mother some work. We lost. The official from the administration was terribly angry with her after Friday's council. He said a lot of ugly words, scolded for indecision and incompetence. What does he know? How long had he worked at the school? So Gabriella firmly decided to leave. Good thing her seniority and age allowed her to ask for resignation. If they said 2 weeks, that's fine, the official said, waving his hand. So, on the same Friday, come as a group. Take the district inspector. Draw up the most vicious, the most defamatory report, and take the child away. Is that clear? The principal still couldn't write 6 lines without mistakes. Resignations were supposed to be handwritten. As an experienced teacher, it was completely incomprehensible to her. Why such a mundane document would not be entrusted to a computer? After making another mistake, Gabriella grabbed the paper and tore it up in rage. It felt better. Once she was alone with her thoughts, 2 antagonists appeared alternately in her mind. McCullough, the administration official for whom numbers were the most important thing, and Peggy Petrova, who demanded human feelings and participation from her. Each of them is right in their own way. The official is worried about something irreparable happening. When a person is in trouble, he is capable of anything. And in this case, it's better to be reassured than to rely on risk. A woman in a wheelchair wants to be helped. She has every right to be helped, but by a strange coincidence, Gabriella can't give her a hand. The petition kept failing. This time she cut off on the first line, writing forgiveness. Very symbolic. She really needed forgiveness. What should we do? The girl must have relatives. She has to. At least a father. If McCullough wants her to bring in a policeman, why not ask him for help? These cops have a lot of options. The duty officer patiently told her of no change in her grandmother's condition. The weight was weighing on Laurel, but it was even more difficult for her mother. She called the hospital too, but it looked different. She dialed the numbers and stared at the screen for a long time, hesitated to press the green button. Laurel stood at the entrance to the Divine, waiting for one of the adults. In front of strangers, this rascal will certainly not dare to exercise in wit. Although the girl vowed not to go to the store with an angry saleswoman, there was nowhere to go. They had too many tasks for the weekend, and in the evenings Laurel practiced pass in front of the mirror. So going to a normal store in the neighborhood would mean giving up the class. And today it was vital for her to do stretching, followed by port-de-bras, plies, and battlements. It would help take her mind off her thoughts because of Daddy's silence. She didn't know what to think anymore. After a minute of waiting, some uncle in a long coat approached. He smiled at her and carefully opened the door. "What? It won't budge?" he asked. "Come in, little girl." When she saw the girl at the door, Easy opened her mouth for another witticism, but stopped herself. It was the first time she'd ever seen a man in a coat, and her main rule is not to attack strangers. Anyways, what if Adrian had sent him to check up on her? Judging by the decent coat, he's not from around here. I'll have to bite my tongue. "May come in? I'll serve you," she said as friendly as possible. And you, girl, don't steal anything." No, the man waved his hands. He took the saleswoman's barb as a joke. "First, the girl, or you really need to keep an eye on them. What are you going to buy, little girl?" "Oh, I need a lot of things," said the girl. "And beets and carrots." "Let's you first." "No," the man insisted. "I'm in no hurry. Do you want me to help you?" Satisfied, Laura left the store. What a polite uncle. I wish your daddy was like that, kind and polite. Her phone rang. Mom, Laurel. Mom screamed. "Hurry back." The girl rushed home. It seemed like a short run, but Laurel thought she was moving too slowly. That morning, Peggy decided she was going to move forward no matter what. Yes, getting out of the wheelchair wouldn't work. But now, in the 21st century, it was possible not to leave the house at all. When she was still in the hospital, she was given brochures and flyers where disabled people like her sat smiling in front of computers and laptops. She too would take up such work. She still had a nice laptop with a pretty apple on it from her successful days as deputy director. Peggy had thought about selling it several times, but hadn't dared. And it wasn't just that they wouldn't give a good price for this. This laptop remained the only window into the world of her past, where she was a successful and truly driven woman. Discover the world of remote work, the man broadcast from the screen. You can not only earn, but also realize yourself as a successful, in-demand specialist, enough said, Peggy said impatiently. What is there to do? Why hadn't she thought of doing something like this before? Hours at the laptop allowed her to distract herself from sad thoughts. Her Laurel is only 10 years old. In just 2 weeks, it would be 11. Need to pick herself up and labor from home. Hundreds of articles told how people in much worse condition than her made money. The main thing is not to give up. You can ask someone for help. You could complain. A good mood enveloped her, and sometimes she forgot even about her ailment. But then despair would come over Peggy in a black wave, and that was the worst of it. You can get used to the inconveniences of life. Peggy is lucky that at least she can support herself, and her daughter doesn't have to do the most humiliating work. With the last of their money, they remodeled a toilet and bathroom so that a person with disabilities doesn't feel completely helpless. But the rest of a kitchen set where she could make something more than sandwiches cost an insane amount of money. If she'd known she'd be in this situation, she definitely would have lived more frugally, more sensibly, without spending too much, trying to invest in her own future. Searching for a job on the internet, the woman was so engrossed that she didn't notice how lunch passed. She never called the hospital, but she did manage to find something that looked like a job. She wrote reviews, filled out cards, and did other things like that. Her feeling was going just fine. She was just disconnected from reality. At times, she was distracted by extraneous sounds, like small footsteps in the hallway or rain outside the window. What was it? She didn't want to leave her occupation, but curiosity took over. She rode out into the hallway in her wheelchair and marveled. Small streams of water ran down the walls. It had already completely covered the floor. A newspaper and Laurel slippers were floating. The main leak was in the kitchen area. Peggy didn't even dare go there. Lynn, don't panic. Just have to go upstairs and see which neighbor forgot to turn off the water. Now she'll get up and go, wait, she can't go upstairs, can she? Who do I call? The management company, of course. But in a year of living in this house, Peggy had never taken the time to get to know the local utility company. Peggy drove back to her room. It was still dry. 4 o'clock. Laurel should be on her way home by now. We should ask her to come sooner. After her daughter's call, Peggy came to her senses and pulled up her laptop. The main thing is not to get water on it. Found the phone number of the management company. Busy. Why did she have to go through all this trouble? This mom's call caught Laurel by surprise. What happened? Must be something with her grandmother. The girl ran down the street and looked around. Seems like everyone's a little coffee crazed this year. Vending machines, cafes, like mushrooms and there's only one store in the whole neighborhood. And it's on the way home from school. And she has to go in there every day listening to the nastiness. When you're in a hurry, time is slow on purpose. The universe is in no hurry. And now Laurel ran up to the traffic light, and the green light was still not on. She wanted to run across the road, but the cars were moving in a continuous stream. The girl pressed the button again and again, but the signals did not want to change. Finally, green. You can run on it, the road is free. But only Laurel made a few steps. Near her, there was a squeal of tires. A cab car stopped right beside her. The driver was running a red light. The man felt it his duty to lower the side window and say, "Watch where you're going, asshole." He raised the window and was gone. And Laurel thought that it was drivers like that put her mom in a wheelchair. You have to be more careful, the girl ran on. Here is the house. It is good that they live on the first floor. The distance to the front door she covered in 2 jumps. Mommy. The girl shouted, running into the house. A wave of heat and dampness hit her in the face, and her feet began to slap as if running through a puddle. Did Mom spill water? Laurel thought. Unlike, everything was in water. The walls, the ceilings, the floor. Her boots were instantly soaked with liquid. Nice to mastery. Laurel, we have to collect it, Mom shouted. Immediately collect. The girl rushed into the bathroom, took a bucket and a rag. But there was so much water that the bucket was instantly full. So she took a scoop and started scooping the water with it. The heavy bucket was so hard to lift to pour it into the toilet. Mom, what's going on? The girl asked. We've been flooded, Laurel. Peggy managed to find the culprit. She was told over the phone that the faucet in the 4th floor kitchen caused the problem. The upstairs neighbors were at work. No one noticed the leak until it reached the 1st floor. Tensions everywhere, pouring from outlets, leaking from the walls, dripping from the ceilings. The emergency crew shut off the supply. Now they had no water either. Laurel took out at least 10 full buckets before the dustpan was useless. Then she began to collect water with a rag and wring it out. This struggle with the communal element went on for at least 2 hours. Squeezed out like her own rag to collect water, the girl fell to the floor. She was wet from work and fatigue. The Laurel, get up, said the mother. Get up. You have to change your clothes. You'll get sick. I can't, Laurel replied. No strength. Come on, daughter. Peggy looked at the damage. The already unpretentious apartment looked like a brothel. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls and ceiling. Doctor frames were swollen. Turning on electrical appliances was out of the question. And so, through the fault of a negligent neighbor, they found themselves in a most depressing situation. Laurel finally found the strength to get up. She took off her wet clothes and hung them on the radiator. We should open the windows, Peggy said. It'll get the air out quicker. Just get dressed first. By 9 p.m., the management company came to the apartment. The engineer meticulously described all the damage. The kitchen, the corridor and grandmother's room. It is closest to the epicenter of the attack. Some of the furniture's in the dumpster. Peggy's and Laurel's rooms survived. The water only reached them through the floor without causing any damage. Don't worry, said the man who identified himself as an engineer. We will definitely help you restore everything. And we'll help you with the furniture. Everything. Laurel asked hopefully. Yes, he nodded. We'll wallpaper and whitewash the ceilings. It's our plumber, be damned. Badly hung the faucet. Damn him. Could you start tomorrow? Peggy asked. The thing is, I'd love to, said the engineer. But, no. It takes 2 weeks for everything to dry. You can't do it sooner than that. It's the what Peggy thought about the fact that laws can work, but only when they work against her. I strongly disagree with your act, Peggy said. We were flooded 2 days ago. No, you can file an objection. A week after the humiliating council, on Friday, the delegation showed up unannounced at Peggy's house. Laurel was at school, and that's a good thing. She would surely have yelled at these soulless, heartless women. The committee meticulously inspected the rooms, looked in closets, and the refrigerator. The 2 women kept marking something in their papers. I wish you'd help me, Peggy said. How am I supposed to repaper the wallpaper? I have an allowance of $10,000. I can hardly live on that money. If you can't do it, if you can't cope, just say so, said the guest. The mental strength that had come to Peggy not long ago was again on the verge of exhaustion. One thing that pleased her was that the pain in her back had not returned, even when she lifted her arms high above her head. It must have been that after the mental torment, physical suffering was simply impossible. The girl's room is fine, the inspector summarized. But the common areas need urgent repairs. Didn't you hear that? Peggy asked. I told you we're flooded. You go out in the entryway and there's water stains all over the place. I heard, the woman said. You didn't hear me. We need urgent repairs. Soap is soap. Start over. When Peggy was given the report, she began to read it carefully and make handwritten notes, which displeased the inspectors. Not a single line she left without caustic remarks and comments. At some point, the women accepted that they would not be able to leave quickly and began to wait. The deadline to eliminate the remarks is a week, said one of them. We need to change the wallpaper and the flooring. Bring your tools and I'll get started. Very funny, said one of the inspectors. We understand your situation perfectly well and humanly sympathize with you. But why should the child suffer? When Laurel got home, she saw her mom in tears. She didn't roll out into the hallway to greet her like she usually did. Sitting in front of her laptop, she was browsing some websites. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Mom, Laurel said. I called the hospital. Can you believe Grandma's already been disconnected from something? From what? Peggy asked fearfully. Is that it? I haven't figured it out, Laurel admitted. I thought she couldn't breathe, but now she can. No, thank God, Mom said. We should go see her. At least give her a message from us. No, I'll go tomorrow for sure. Promised Laurel. Mom, were you crying? Yes, my daughter. Mom, but you told me not to give up. That you have to be strong. Have you forgotten? No, I haven't forgotten, said Peggy, wiping away her tears. But sometimes it's okay to cry a little. The important thing, my dear, is to stop in time. Well went into the kitchen. The wooden floor had heaved and now resembled an obstacle course for toy cars. The air was still damp. The water had evaporated from the surfaces. She made her mother some tea and a couple of cheese sandwiches and brought them into the room. Laurel herself didn't want to eat. Mom, you're not going to give me to them, are you? The girl asked. No, dear. You and I will always be together, no matter what happens. Laved would by quickly, even too quickly. That Friday, Laurel decided not to go to school. If it was her last day at home, it was better to spend it with her mom. Besides, she had never skipped a class. It was time to make a simple breakfast, watch TV together. If the weather was nice, they could try to go outside. Laurel went to the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. Not much. There were 3 eggs in the door and 2 mushrooms in the vegetable compartment. She also found a couple of sausages and a tiny piece of cheese. She beat the eggs, added the sliced sausages and mushrooms, topped it all with the rest of the ketchup, crumbled the cheese and poured it into the pan. It made a great omelet that tasted like pizza. I take it you didn't go to school, Mom asked, eating her breakfast. No, Laurel answered. I don't feel well. I understand, Mom nodded. If the school committee comes, they might take you away. Let's not think about bad things, she said. You'll still be able to visit me if you need to. Or I'll run away and come back to you. They were silent for a while. Laurel put the kettle on the stove. How good it is to have breakfast like this without hurry, to talk to a dear person. After all, it used to be like that, but it was her mother, not her, who worked on the streets. Would anyone think of separating them? Suddenly, the bell rang. 9:30 in the morning. Come and see, Mom said with a smile. On the doorstep stood a young man with a large box. Like a wizard, he rummaged through it, took out a package and handed it to her. Delivery service, the young man replied. Here, sign here. But But we didn't order anything. The girl was surprised. We have nothing to pay with. Strange. The address seems to be the same. Shrugged the courier. You don't need to pay. It's a prepayment. I too. I'll ask, Laurel replied and took a box. With it, she went to the kitchen. Her mother was sitting there, smiling strangely. Laurel had not seen her so satisfied and even happy for a long time. Open it, she said. Laurel took out the box, lifted the lid. Point shoes. The real ones, white in color. The girl's hands trembled with excitement. She put them on her feet. They fit just right. She stood on her tiptoes and began to do the movements she had learned herself in front of the mirror. There wasn't much room in their narrow kitchen. Happy birthday, Mom said. Did you think I'd forgotten? Oh, Mom, thank you, Laura replied. I forgot myself. But where did the money come? You won't believe it, daughter, said Peggy. I earned it myself on the internet. You saw that I was on my laptop for 2 weeks. It was a real miracle. Laurel rushed to the door to thank the courier, but he was already gone. Through the first floor window, she could see him dragging his box and checking with the navigator. What a job, the girl thought. He must be exhausted by evening. Did you think I didn't know your secrets? Mom winked at her. How can I tell you? Laurel shrugged. No, there's no secret. I always wanted to be a ballerina. No sooner had they finished their tea than a new bell rang. It was timid, even hesitant, as if the visitor was hesitant to come in. Peggy froze with her mug raised. Was it really that early? She asked. I thought they were coming tonight. Don't give up, Mom, the girl said. The bell rang again. Laurel went to the door and looked through the peephole. She expected to see Gabriella, her classmate, and other familiar people. Big deal, the school didn't show up. Instead of a huge delegation, there was a man standing there. Something about his face seemed familiar. It seemed that she had already seen his picture somewhere. Hello, Laurel said. Who do you want? Hello, P. The man whispered and smiled. May sent Eddie. The girl shouted, opening the door wide. What the hell is this? Adrian looked around his store and couldn't believe his eyes. What was his serf doing? On the door was a proud sign written in marker, Recount. When had it closed, all the aisles were filled with cardboard boxes, on which the same marker indicated the type of goods and their quantity. Some, with milk, kefir, and cheese, were carefully placed in refrigerators. What the hell is this? Adrian asked and grabbed Easy by the sweater. I'm asking you, what is this? Get your hands off me. I'm quitting, replied the salesgirl. Yeah, how dare you? Resented the owner. Here, take a look at this, said Easy, and handed him a whole notebook written in her hand. I've counted it all. There's a shortage, but it's not much. 3,000. I put it in the cash register. What do you think you're doing? Adrian said. His entire pavilion is only 50 square meters with the warehouse. That's exactly what he needs to sell alcohol. The basis of his prosperity. Adrian had squeezed the most out of this modest space. The goods are everywhere, in the refrigerators, on the counter, and even in the aisles. But another important part of his success is the reliable Easy, whose ex almost drove him into the world. Of course, in the 500,000, he wrote absolutely all the shortfall over the years of the store, but the uncomplaining saleswoman swallowed it. She didn't argue, she worked a double shift. Easy, let's talk. Adrian suddenly changed his anger into mercy. You have to give me 2 weeks' notice. I'll find a replacement. No, you won't, replied the saleswoman. We have an employment contract with you, remember? Adrian tried to make it look like he was complying with the law. Easy did indeed work for him officially, but since he couldn't afford a lawyer, he had to handle the paperwork himself. Had he missed the end of her contract? Easy, you can't do that, the landlord said. We can talk. I'll cancel some of your debt. Debt. ESC's face twisted. I've paid it all off. I'm leaving. Out of what if the police? Adrian said hopefully. The court. Go ahead, replied the former saleswoman. She took off her apron, the only uniform her stingy employer had provided her with, and threw it on the floor. Opening the door, she slammed it hard, hoping to break the glass. But it held. It would swing wide open, and he would walk in with a victorious gait. He'd hand out the presents. Peggy, realizing and forgiving, would rush to embrace him. But instead of his cheerful daughter, he sees a thin, haggard Laurel. Does she eat anything at all? Shabby wallpaper hung from the ceilings and walls. In the kitchen of the old, shabby apartment sat Peggy, sitting in her wheelchair. She covered her face with her hand in embarrassment. Of course, she'd once been so strong, so powerful and independent. Life had taken its toll on her. Vincent held out the bouquet he'd bought at the train station. Bright red roses, just the way she liked them. Nice waits. Here I am, he exhaled. I'm back. Peggy was silent. He could read a whole range of feelings in her gaze, but hate was not one of them. I wondered if she'd filed for divorce. That last time, 4 years ago, when she'd refused to see him, he'd snapped, found a job 3 miles away, and left. He hasn't been back home in over 3 years. A year ago, V-Contact offered him a new friend, with the same surname and familiar facial features. It turned out Laurel had grown up. They communicated for a year, and then he realized that he could no longer be away from his daughter, especially when a schoolmate called him and told him that he was wanted by the principal of the school where Laurel attends. True, he had not been told about Peggy's misfortune. Papa, I'm so glad, Laurel said. How about some tea? Peggy remained silent, and Vincent stood holding out the flowers. Then the girl took them and put them in a 3-liter jar. They didn't have a vase at home. She suddenly realized that she had never imagined meeting her father at all. There were almost no childhood memories of him, only of going to the movies and once eating ice cream. I'm sorry, Peggy, he said after a long silence. It's my fault. I gave in. Peggy was silent. Vincent wondered if his wife had filed for divorce. He certainly wouldn't have done it himself. On his passport, they were still husband and wife. An inner strength prevented Peggy from not only asking for help, but even accepting it. All she had to do was say 2 words about the state she was in. He would have flown in, rushed over. But she didn't say a word. If you won't forgive me for your own sake, then forgive me for your daughter's sake, Vincent asked. I can see it's not easy for you. I don't know, Peggy said. I don't know if you can stay with us, after all you've done. Or rather, what you haven't done. I don't know either, Vincent shrugged. Peggy's always been like that. If a man is strong, he measures others by himself. He sees any weakness as a betrayal. He'd always been weaker than she was. His wife's expressive silence hit him worse than any shout. He wanted to get up, to rush outside, and run to the airport, fly far away from here. But he felt in his gut that both his daughter and his wife needed his help. Why don't we vote? Laurel suggested it. Who's in favor of Daddy staying? I'm in favor. Peggy was silent. Laurel could see from her mom that she was hesitant. She wants to be a proud, independent woman, but they can't do it without Daddy. So he didn't fool her, he came. And just when she needed him most, who would dare separate them now? Me, too, Vincent said. I want to stay with you. If not right here, I'll get an apartment somewhere. I'll come and help out, take Laurel to school. She can do that all by herself, Peggy said sharply. You should have asked her if she had winter clothes and shoes. Yes, she does. Vincent shouted happily. And you and me, Laurel, we're going shopping, aren't we? And we'll take your mother, won't we? He looked hesitantly at Peggy's legs, covered with a blanket. He would have liked to ask what had happened and what the prospects were, but he was afraid of making his wife angry. Afraid she would change her mind and throw him out the door. If she wants to, he added hastily. You two go, the woman said. I'll allow it. I have things to do here. Gabriella was determined that the play-called removal of the child from the family would take place without her. She didn't return calls from administration officials. She sent her letter of resignation by courier. She has every right not to visit the girl and not to tear her from the arms of her loving mother. Really, there's nothing else the principal can do. No, she asked not to let anyone in, said the receptionist. Gabriella is very ill. Out of my way. The authoritative voice was McCullough's, of course. He swung open the door to the headmaster's office and entered regally. The principal was, indeed, not well. The official waved her application, holding it up squeamishly with 2 fingers. Look at what she's up to. Care to explain? McCullough demanded. What is this? This. The principal interjected. My resignation. I'm resigning. It's my legal right. Oh, legal right. The official was raging. Right. So this is how you do my bidding. Coffee for us. He demanded, but no one came forward to do his bidding. McCullough could not understand why this obedient and uncomplaining woman was suddenly rebelling. He must bring the process to an end to take Laurel away from her negligent mother. What did it matter why she could not fulfill her duties? And then, at the last moment, the principal stabs him in the back at 6:00 p.m. I'm closing the office, she said. And I'm leaving. And to the Pattinsons. And I'm not going to the Pattinsons, the principal said. Period. Well, nothing. Replied the official. Nothing. There will be teachers who will fulfill my assignment. And you, Gabriella, will be That day, Laurel finally felt like herself, a little girl. Yes, she had just turned 11, so she might as well be a little weaker than adults. Daddy, it turns out, doesn't know the city at all. Together with him, they searched for shopping centers on the internet, drove there, walked around. It seemed that Daddy wanted to catch up on all the years he had missed. Laurel couldn't relax and kept looking at the prices. How expensive everything was. But Daddy put his arm around her shoulders and told her it was nothing. That he could afford a lot of things. But the girl still tried to choose things cheaper. It's a great jacket, she persuaded her father. Very warm, but it's short for you. You, replied her father. Take it off immediately. Then there was a cafe where Dad ordered her a small cake with a candle. The animator sang congratulations to the whole shopping center, and the visitors clapped her from the tables. Quite sincerely. They didn't get home until the evening. Laurel was happy. She hadn't gotten so many presents in a long time. Could it really be true? Sam, there was a noise in the entrance. The girl recognized a familiar voice. It seemed to shout psychologist from school. Around her gathered a whole delegation, which was cramped in the corridor of an old panel house. But the mother, sitting on a wheelchair, steadfastly held the defense. And I'm telling you, she's not here. She said irritably. She's out walking, and I won't let you into the apartment. Then I'll call the police, answered the psychologist. And they'll take you to the police station for hiding your daughter from us. I'm not hiding from anyone, Laurel said. Hello? Here she is, said the psychologist happily. We'll make a report, take her away, Vincent felt afraid. Where were they going to take his daughter? He'd come back to her after all these years to lose her all at once. He stepped forward and covered Laurel with his large figure. The educators looked at him in surprise. And who are you? One of them asked. I'm the father, he replied. No, how dare you? Peggy shouted. We're a happy family, woman, the psychologist said arrogantly. If you bring a man home, it's not always a sign of well-being. This is my husband, said Peggy. My passport, the psychologist demanded. Vincent took out a document and handed it to the delegation. Each member of the delegation examined his passport in turn. After a long journey, the appearance of the document left much to be desired, but the page with the marriage registration and the birth certificate were still intact. I don't understand anything. The psychologist stretched out. How did we miss it? But I understand everything, Vincent said and grabbed his passport. He suddenly felt empowered. Get out of the way, don't you see? The child is tired and wants to rest. The man moved the school delegation with what seemed to him to be a slight movement of his hand. In fact, they parted on their own. Vincent let Laurel pass, glanced over his shoulder. He was about to close the door, but then he thought it would be polite to be polite. We're a normal family, he said. Normal. Just leave it alone, that's all. Be happy.